A king entered the forest with men he trusted. He was found dead before sunset. No witness spoke. By nightfall, his brother was already preparing to rule. This case was never solved. No trial followed. No confession was recorded. What remains is a medieval death, reopened centuries later. This is Medieval Cold Cases. The body was found in the New Forest, a royal hunting ground, strictly controlled, forbidden to common men. The king lay where the trees opened slightly, far from roads, far from help. An arrow had entered his chest, not deflected, not glancing, driven straight and deep. The strike was precise, deliberate, and fatal within moments. Those meant to protect him were gone. No guards nearby, no companions waiting, no signal raised. The forest was silent, as if emptied on purpose. No alarm was raised for hours. By the time others arrived, the light had shifted. The fog had thinned. The forest had settled back into itself. This was not wilderness. It was managed land. Every path known, every entry watched, every hunt recorded. A place where accidents were rare and strangers noticed. The king was experienced. He did not ride alone without reason. He did not dismiss guards carelessly. Yet here he lay, unattended, unanswered, already claimed by silence. What happened here was not chaos. It was contained, and whatever truly occurred in this forest ended before anyone was meant to see it. William Rufus was not the kind of king people mourned loudly. He was feared more than loved, respected more than trusted. He ruled through authority, not warmth, and in medieval England, that distinction mattered. William was strong, decisive, and unapologetic. He taxed heavily. He punished quickly. He ignored advice he didn't like. To his enemies, he was dangerous. To his allies, he was unpredictable. To his family, he was an obstacle. William had no legitimate heir, no son waiting in the wings, no clear successor groomed for the crown. In medieval politics, that absence was not neutral. It was an invitation. Every noble knew what happened when a king died without an heir. Power rushed in to fill the gap, often violently. William's court was full of men who understood this, men who counted days, men who watched succession lines like gamblers watch dice. Among them was his younger brother. Henry was not the obvious choice for king. He was not the eldest. He was not the strongest. And at the time of William's death, he held no crown. But Henry was something else. He was patient. In medieval families, younger sons learned early that survival required strategy. They watched. They waited. And when opportunity appeared, they moved quickly. Henry was nearby on the day of the hunt, not in the forest itself, but close enough to act. William, meanwhile, had made choices that narrowed his circle. He trusted fewer men than he once had. He relied heavily on a small group of companions. And on the hunt that day, those companions would be the only witnesses to his final hours. That concentration of trust mattered, because when something went wrong, there were no outsiders to question it, only insiders to explain it. William's personality had earned him many quiet enemies. Church leaders resented him. Nobles resented his control. And his family resented the crown that stood between them and power. When kings die naturally, mourning follows. When they die suddenly, suspicion follows faster. William's death did not produce grief. It produced movement. Before his body was even cold, plans were forming. Messengers were sent. Keys were turned. Treasuries were secured. This is not how accidents behave. This is how transitions behave. And that difference between tragedy and opportunity is where cold cases begin. William Rufus did not die unknown. He died watched, measured, and surrounded by people whose lives would immediately improve without him. That alone does not prove murder, but in any modern investigation, it would demand attention. The explanation given for William's death was brief, and it arrived quickly. According to the chroniclers, the king had died during a routine hunt. One of his own men fired an arrow at a deer. The shot went wrong. William was struck. That was the record. The man identified as having fired the arrow was named Walter Tyrell. Tyrell was not a novice. He was an experienced nobleman, well known as a skilled hunter. He was trusted enough to be close to the king that day, close enough for his actions to matter. The chroniclers offer no detailed reconstruction of the moment. There is no description of distance, position, or line of sight. There is no attempt to explain how the king came to be in the path of the arrow. The account simply moves on. In theory, this was not impossible. Hunting was dangerous, and accidents did happen. But the speed with which this explanation was accepted is what makes it unusual. When kings died unexpectedly, questions normally followed. Councils gathered. Witnesses were pressed. Blame, even if symbolic, was often assigned. None of that happened here. Instead, the story settled almost immediately into permanence. What happened next deepened the unease. Walter Tyrell did not remain in England. He left almost at once, crossing into another kingdom before any formal inquiry could begin. He did not wait to explain himself. He did not stay to defend the accident narrative that now bore his name. He never returned. In any era, departure like that draws attention. Accidents usually create explanations. This one produced disappearance. With Tyrell gone, there was no one to question, no testimony to compare, no contradiction to record. The story remained simple because nothing challenged it. At the same time, events outside the forest were moving with remarkable clarity. William's brother, Henry, acted decisively. Rather than remaining near the body or awaiting counsel, he rode to Winchester. There, he secured the royal treasury, the physical foundation of power. This was done quickly, efficiently, without hesitation. Within days, Henry would be crowned king. None of this was illegal. None of it violated medieval custom, but it revealed something important. Moments of true accident tend to create confusion. Moments of opportunity tend to produce direction. Here, direction appeared almost immediately. The official story required the kingdom to accept a sequence of coincidences: a fatal misfire, a vanished shooter, a successor ready to rule without delay. History accepted that version. Cold cases exist because behavior sometimes tells a different story than records do, and in this case, the behavior surrounding the king's death raises questions that the explanation never answers. When modern investigators reopen a case, they begin with three questions: who benefited? Who had access? Who stayed silent? In William's death, those questions narrow the field quickly. The first person history points toward is also the most obvious: Henry, William's younger brother. At the moment of William's death, Henry was not king. He did not hold the crown, but he was close enough to reach it quickly. In medieval succession, timing was everything. The first man to secure the treasury, the support of key nobles, and the blessing of the church often won, regardless of legal purity. Henry moved with speed that day. While William's body lay in the forest, Henry rode for Winchester. There, he took control of the royal treasury. Coins, seals, documents, the physical instruments of rule. This was not a symbolic act. It was a practical one. By the time questions could have been organized, power was already consolidating around him. Henry later defended his actions as necessary. England could not be left leaderless. Order had to be maintained. That explanation is reasonable, but it does not erase the advantage. Henry gained everything from William's death: status, security, a crown, and he gained it without resistance. That alone does not prove involvement. Many innocent men benefit from tragedy, but investigators are trained to notice when benefit and opportunity overlap. Henry was nearby. He was prepared, and he acted with certainty. The second figure is quieter, but equally important: Walter Tyrell, the man named as the shooter. Tyrell's role is difficult to assess precisely because he removes himself from history almost immediately. What we know is limited. He was close enough to the king to be blamed. He was skilled enough that an accident would be questioned, and he left England with urgency that suggests he did not expect protection. If Tyrell believed he would be shielded by Henry, by the court, or by the church, there would have been no need to flee. If he believed he would be punished, flight makes sense. But there is a third possibility: that Tyrell was not acting alone. In medieval power struggles, direct violence was often delegated. Kings rarely dirtied their own hands. They relied on proximity, suggestion, silence. Tyrell may have been responsible for the arrow, but responsibility is not the same as authorship. And then there are the men who remain unnamed, the companions on the hunt, men who rode with the king, men who separated from him, men who later did not testify publicly. Their silence is difficult to interpret. Medieval records are incomplete by nature, but silence clustered around moments of power transfer deserves attention. No surviving account preserves a detailed witness statement from the hunt. No voice contradicts the accident story. No chronicler records outrage from those closest to the king. This does not mean those reactions did not exist. It means they did not survive. In modern cases, silence can be accidental. In medieval cases, silence is often engineered. What emerges is not a clear murderer. It is a network of advantage. Henry gains the crown. Tyrell disappears. Witnesses disperse. The kingdom stabilizes. The system absorbs the shock. And that is often the final mark of an effective crime. Not chaos, but order. To understand why William's death was never truly investigated, you have to understand how justice worked in the medieval world. There was no independent authority tasked with investigating the death of a king, no neutral court, no professional investigators. Justice flowed downward from power. It did not rise up to challenge it. When a king died, responsibility for explaining that death fell to the same system that benefited from stability afterward. And stability mattered more than truth. England in 1100 was not secure. It was still recovering from conquest, rebellion, and fragile succession. The idea of prolonged uncertainty was dangerous. Questions invited factions. Factions invited violence. So explanations were chosen carefully. An accident was the safest possible conclusion. It required no enemy, no punishment, no destabilizing accusation against the royal family. It allowed the kingdom to move forward without reopening wounds. The church, too, had reason to accept this version. A contested investigation would have forced them to choose sides. Silence avoided that. And then there is the matter of evidence. There was no forensic process to preserve it, no autopsy in the modern sense, no systematic examination of the scene. The body was prepared for burial quickly, as custom allowed. The arrow, if recovered, was not documented. The positions of men in the forest were never reconstructed. In medieval society, burial did not just mark the end of life. It marked the end of inquiry. Even witnesses, had they wished to speak, would have faced risk. Accusing a new king, even indirectly, was dangerous. Accusing powerful nobles was worse. Memory in such environments does not survive unprotected. It adapts, it aligns, and eventually it disappears. This is why medieval cold cases are different from modern ones. They are not unsolved because the evidence is confusing. They are unsolved because the system was never designed to seek resolution. The purpose of medieval justice was not truth. It was order. And in William's case, order was achieved quickly. The crown passed. The treasury remained secure. The kingdom continued. Reopening a medieval case does not mean solving it. There is no DNA to test, no scene to revisit, no witness left to question. What remains is probability. When modern investigators look at deaths like this, they do not ask, what is possible? They ask, what is likely? And when William's death is examined that way, the accident explanation weakens. For the arrow to strike the king as described, William would have needed to be positioned directly in the line of fire. That alone is unusual for a monarch during a hunt. Kings were valuable. They were watched carefully. They were rarely placed in situations where a single mistake could end everything. The shot itself raises further questions. Deflected arrows lose force. They behave unpredictably. They are far less likely to penetrate deeply enough to kill quickly. Yet, William's wound was immediately fatal. That suggests a clean strike. Then there is the matter of proximity. If Walter Tyrell fired the arrow, he would have been close enough to see the result, close enough to respond, close enough to raise alarm. Instead, he left, and not after questioning, not after counsel, but before any inquiry could take shape. That decision matters. Flight does not prove guilt, but it does suggest expectation. Expectation of blame, or expectation that silence would not protect him. Finally, there is the timing. Henry's response was not reactive. It was prepared. He knew where to go, what to secure, and how quickly it needed to be done. That kind of clarity rarely appears by accident. Taken together, these elements point toward a coordinated outcome rather than random misfortune. Not necessarily a planned assassination in the modern sense, but a situation shaped to allow a death to occur and then to be absorbed without disruption. In medieval politics, that was often enough. Responsibility did not require orders spoken aloud. It required proximity, understanding, and silence afterward. The most plausible conclusion is not that William was struck by chance. It is that his death was made possible by those who stood to gain, and protected afterward by a system that valued stability over truth. We cannot say who gave instruction. We cannot say who loosed the arrow with intent. But we can say this: too many people benefited, too many questions were avoided, and too much order followed too quickly. That combination rarely belongs to accidents. William Rufus was buried quickly. There was no extended mourning, no prolonged uncertainty, no public reckoning. The kingdom moved forward. Henry was crowned king within days. He ruled for more than 30 years. By most accounts, he ruled well. Order returned. Stability followed. History prefers outcomes like this. A successful reign has a way of quieting uncomfortable questions about how it began. Over time, the story of William's death settled into simplicity. A hunting accident, an unfortunate misfire, a moment of bad luck in a dangerous sport. The forest remained. The grave remained. The explanation hardened. Chroniclers copied one another. Later, historians repeated what survived, and the absence of contradiction slowly transformed into acceptance. That is how unresolved deaths disappear, not through answers, but through repetition. Today, William's body lies in Winchester Cathedral. A stone marker names him king. It does not mention the arrow. It does not mention the forest. It does not mention the men who were there, or the ones who were not. There is no record of justice denied, only justice unattempted. This is why medieval cold cases endure. Not because the truth is unknowable, but because the systems of the time had no incentive to uncover it. Whether William was murdered by design, by suggestion, or by opportunity, one fact remains unchanged. A king entered the forest. He did not return. And those who benefited were already in position when his body was found. No one was ever punished. The body remained. The truth faded, and history recorded what was convenient. This was a medieval cold case,